So, I've been telling you it's a duplex, right? Buying a house without consulting me. And a duplex at that? I can't believe this is serious. This isn't what we agreed on. I fiercely protested to my husband. I didn't hear anything about this. We decided we weren't going to live together. Shut up. Don't talk back to the breadwinner. How could I not respond? The breadwinner should be ashamed to hear this. His income is only a quarter of mine. At this rate, I'll always be treated like a slave. This is no joke. I've had enough of taking care of my arrogant mother-in-law and dealing with my selfish father-in-law. To regain the freedom I once lost, I've made a big decision. My name is Elizabeth. I'm 32 years old. I work in the trade department of a listed company, utilizing my proficiency in Spanish. Sometimes I travel back and forth between overseas branches, and honestly, it's very busy. But that's why my salary is much higher than the average for my age. It's a very rewarding job. I've been married to Albert for 2 years now. We met through a college friend who introduced us 3 years ago. Truth be told, I never thought I, a workaholic, would ever get married. I lacked confidence in my appearance, and I thought I might end up single for life. So I'm very grateful to Albert for liking me as I am and marrying me. Even if life gets tough, we've decided to work through it together as a couple. When we were newlyweds, we used to talk about our future goals and dreams every night. I want to buy a house. As big as possible. A single-family home with a yard. And I want to have a dog. That sounds great. I also want kids. Maybe 3. I've always envied large families since I'm an only child. I'll have them. Once that's settled, we need to make a plan. How many kids should we have by when? But in reality, it wasn't that simple. We tried, but ultimately, we couldn't have children. I don't regret that we couldn't have kids. In fact, I think it's for the best. As time passed in our marriage and we spent more time together, various problems began to emerge. Particularly about living with the in-laws, my husband and I never saw eye to eye until the end. Do you eventually want to live together? Huh? I don't like that idea. I want to spend it just the two of us. But someday my parents won't be able to live on their own, you know. Shouldn't they just plan to go into a care facility like my parents? That would cost money though. Sorry, let's talk about this another time. No matter how many times my husband mentioned it, I refused to live with the in-laws. I had a strong resistance to living in a multi-generational home. I witnessed my mother struggle with it. The grandmother I lived with wasn't mean, but she was strict. My mother often sighed and didn't seem very happy. Elizabeth, when you get married, you should live just with your husband. She used to say to me so often. To honor my mother's teaching, I was determined never to live with the in-laws. Then one day, my husband made a suggestion. I'll give up on the idea of living together in the future. Instead, could I ask a favor? What kind of favor? You need to borrow money or something? No, not that. I need help at my parents' house over the weekend. Even just Saturday would be fine. Just recently, my mother-in-law Hannah had fallen down the stairs at home and hurt her back. Because of that, she wasn't able to do the housework properly. Weekends are precious downtime for me, a chance to refresh. It was hard to give that up to tend to the in-laws. But if I refused, Albert and his parents might feel bad. Thinking of this, I agreed to help at my in-laws' house. And I ended up regretting it greatly. My in-laws were some of the most troublesome people I had ever met. Mother-in-law Hannah loved casinos and slots more than meals. I had lived a life completely free of gambling. She would even blow through her pension on the day she withdrew it from the bank. And when she ran out of money for her games, she'd make a sorry face and pester me for pocket money. Elizabeth, I'm sorry to ask, but could you lend me $100? I'll pay you back double. I hadn't agreed to lend money to my mother-in-law. And there was another thing I hadn't been told about beforehand. On Saturday night, she asked me to stay over to help at the in-laws. I wouldn't be free until afternoon on Sunday. I could barely have any time for myself. My irritation only grew. Not once did the money I lent my selfish mother-in-law come back doubled. It was as good as throwing it down the drain. Honestly, giving her the money, knowing this, was a pain. When I brought this up, Albert apologized with a face much like his mother's. My mom taking out loans from shady lenders would be a disaster, right? That's exactly what I want to avoid. So you're saying I should just quietly hand over the allowance? Albert should be the one doing it. Sorry. I really do feel bad about it. My mother-in-law, Hannah, never holds back with me. Once, when dinner was late, I bought some prepared food and set it out. The way Hannah spoke to me then. I can still vividly remember how angry I was that day. Elizabeth, are you trying to make us eat ready-made food? I'm sorry. I just didn't have time to cook today. Ha! Unbelievable. Who do you think you are, acting like that? You're just a daughter-in-law. What's so wrong with setting out prepared food on the table? If they have complaints, I wish they'd at least prepare their own meals first and eat them. When I say that, Hannah glares at me with a displeased look and sighs. As we spend more time together, her attitude just gets worse. Whenever I slightly object, she immediately raises her eyebrows. Have I not always told you not to be cheeky? Do you want to be hit? Hannah, please. Stop talking like that. You're the one at fault here. Keep talking nonsense, and I might just make Albert divorce you. She thinks threatening me will make me comply. I dread the weekends coming. I feel worse than when I have to visit a particularly difficult client. The person who makes me feel even worse than my mother-in-law? That's my father-in-law. He has absolutely no sense of morals or manners. I was shocked one Saturday night when I saw him wandering around naked after his bath. And the bathroom too. He uses it with the door open. When I protest because it's too much. It's my house, I can do whatever I want in it. Could you at least stop while I'm here helping out? No way. Don't get all high and mighty, you're just a daughter-in-law. No matter how humbly I ask, my father-in-law just ignores me. He's so vulgar and crude, it's disgusting to think he's family. Just like Hannah, my father-in-law is simply not the type of person I should be dealing with. What I hate most about him is his bad drinking habits. When he's drunk, he invariably causes trouble in stores or annoys the people around him. Throwing things and causing scenes are common, and he often gets into fights with other drunk patrons. The place doesn't matter. Whether it's at home or in a store, as soon as he gets drunk, he starts causing trouble. On Saturday nights when my father-in-law goes out drinking, I'm always the one who has to pick him up. The embarrassment of having to apologize to shop staff and other customers. I've even had to go pick up my father-in-law after the police called. I've become quite familiar with some of the officers because of him. There's something else about my father-in-law that I found particularly dreadful. Every Saturday night, when I was at the in-laws and took a bath, he'd come to the changing room. I was so nervous he might jokingly open the door that I couldn't relax. Sometimes, I even found my underwear missing. I talked to Albert about it, but he was no help at all. The disappearances didn't stop, and my underwear kept vanishing one after another. Because of this, I had to take my own measures for self-defense. As you can see from these episodes with the in-laws, my husband is incredibly unreliable. He can't stand up to either his father or his mother, so he couldn't speak up for me. Yet, he acts all high and mighty with me. About a year into our marriage, he seemed like a completely changed person. Hey, I quit my job. What? Why would you decide something so important on your own? What's the point in discussing it with you? I'm gonna do what I want to do. He declared and became a self-proclaimed programmer. He said he would start taking jobs online. How much can he earn each month? What kind of work does he do? When I asked these questions, he looked annoyed. Shut up. I'm gradually going to increase my clients. You should have waited until you had a stable income before quitting. Stop nagging. Don't complain about every decision I make. It was clear that he was planning to depend on my high income. When we got married, we opened a joint account in his name and deposited money into it every month. Since Albert became a programmer, the money in that joint account has been dwindling. Whenever I ask what he spent it on, he dodges the question with vague answers. I spent it on networking events with fellow programmers. Gradually, Albert and I stopped making eye contact. There must be something shady going on. That's when I found out about his affair. A mutual friend who had attended our wedding told me. I was furious. Naturally, I started to think about divorce. I had had enough of his parents too. I began to think this marriage was a mistake. It was during this time that I had to go on a month-long business trip abroad. The destination was Colombia. Participating in an ongoing project at the branch office and staying locally. I was overjoyed at the thought of being on my own after such a long time. Who could have imagined what was happening back home? A month flew by quickly, and when I returned home, unbelievable news awaited me. We bought a house. It's the dream home we've always wanted. A 3-bedroom house with a garden. Aren't you happy? And it's a duplex. We won't need to go to my parents' house anymore. Huh? Wait, I'm confused. You bought a house. What kind of house? That's what I'm saying, it's a duplex. I never heard about this. We decided we weren't going to live together. Sure, we talked about buying a house someday. We talked countless times about wanting a single-family home with a garden and a dog. But I said I didn't want to live together. I repeated that many times. But... Shut up. Don't talk back to the breadwinner. After all, I'm the one paying $400,000. What breadwinner? I earn much more than him. And yet he plans to leech off me. And then, I noticed something shocking in the real estate documents. Could my in-laws and husband have missed it? What kind of contract did they sign? It's truly unbelievable to enter into a real estate purchase with such a misunderstanding. The bill was for $4 million? Huh? What are you talking about? $4 million? What's that about? That's what Albert bought, this house. Isn't it written right here? What? What does this mean? The color drained from my husband's face. It means just that. Apparently, my husband bought the house through a real estate agent who claimed to know his father. However, it turned out later that my father-in-law didn't know any such real estate company. Maybe he forgot after drinking, or it was probably a scam. Albert was tricked into buying a house worth $4 million. Surely, I didn't intend for this isn't going to cut it. There has to be some sort of cooling-off period, right? I don't think. It's not a contract that can be easily terminated. The house is a 3-story reinforced concrete building in a quiet residential area in the city center with good sunlight. The interior and exterior renovations are complete, and it looks as good as new. There's a garage on the first floor, and it's not too far from the station, and supermarkets and hospitals are nearby. If it really was $400,000, it would be a steal. But that's not possible. My husband just stared at the documents, trembling violently. I had run out of patience with him. Hey Albert, let's get a divorce. I can't live with you guys anymore. What? What are you talking about? I'm not going to divorce you, Elizabeth. You're just trying to run away because I accidentally bought a $4 million house. Yes, that's right. How do you expect me to live with a man who makes such ridiculous mistakes? Albert bit his lip and looked down in frustration. It was clear he was full of regret. The withdrawal account was the joint account we used as a couple. When Albert suggested it was a joint responsibility, I shot it down. Then you should have consulted me before making this kind of agreement. What do you mean joint responsibility when you went ahead and planned everything while I was away and bought it without me? Well, yeah. I thought you wouldn't agree to live with my parents unless I pushed it through like this. I told you before, we agreed not to live together. This is what happens when you try sneaky ways, it backfires. You've brought it upon yourself. Albert said nothing more and kept his head down. I was completely fed up and didn't want to say anything more. I was tired from the business trip. I decided to put off the divorce discussion until tomorrow. The next day, Saturday, unexpected visitors came to our apartment. My in-laws. Usually, I was the one visiting them, they never came to us. Apparently, they had heard from Albert about the $4 million house. Both my father-in-law and mother-in-law looked serious. As soon as I came out dressed, my mother-in-law Hannah glared at me. No divorce. You two are in a huge mess right now, you have to get through this together. Understand? Get through it together? The problem is Albert bought the house without telling me. I did nothing wrong, so please don't drag me into this. Besides, I'm getting a divorce. I shouldn't be saddled with paying for this. What? You're planning to run away because it's inconvenient for you. I won't allow it. Honestly, I've wanted a divorce long before the $4 million issue came up. Both my in-laws and Albert looked puzzled. All three had no clue what I was talking about. I decided it was time to thoroughly explain how much I regretted this marriage. Really, it was all just awful things I had to hear during our marriage. Mother-in-law, do you even realize how terrible the things you said to me were? Do you remember the abusive language you used? Abusive language? What are you talking about? I don't think I said anything like that. Do you really not remember? Or did you not think those were abusive words? Do you want to be hit, or calling me a worthless wife? You used to say those things to me, right? That's because you were the problem, so I had to say it. I don't remember ever being the problem. No matter how tough it got, I always managed the household well. And whatever the reason, abusive language is never acceptable. It seemed like my mother-in-law Hannah didn't quite grasp that fundamental idea. Whatever the reason, saying "do you want to be hit" to someone is a threat. It's something that could get you sued for damages. What? But I was just trying to scare you. That's exactly the problem. It's a threat. I'll make you divorce if you keep talking back. You've said that to me before. That's wrong too. I've been keeping notes on all the terrible things you've said to me, you know? Hannah's face turned pale. It seemed he realized that if it came to court, he would surely lose. The mention of potentially having to pay damages seemed to have an effect as well. Seeing my mother-in-law Hannah become quite subdued, I turned to my father-in-law. You too, sir. Remember? I've been greatly troubled by you. Troubled? Nonsense. I never intended any of that. A daughter-in-law is supposed to devote herself to her in-laws' family. Don't play the victim. It's audacious. You have quite the nerve to be so bold. Do you even realize how much money you've cost me? I've kept detailed records of every cent I've had to pay because of you. Payment. Is it the alcohol you're talking about? I don't remember that. Don't drink to the point of losing your memory. I've said it many times, but it seems my father-in-law never remembers. When he's drunk, he often breaks things in the restaurant. Adding up the food and the compensation for broken items, the money I've spent for my father-in-law amounts to thousands of dollars. It's true what they say, little things add up to a lot. Hearing this, my father-in-law looked like he was about to cry. Are you saying I have to pay it back? Don't say such harsh things. Aren't you my daughter-in-law? Like I said before, a daughter-in-law is supposed to serve her in-laws' family. Isn't that right? That's wrong. Who decided such a ridiculous thing? Just listen and give me back my money. And it's not just about the money. Sir, you've stolen my underwear several times, haven't you? What? You. Were you really doing such disgraceful things? No, I didn't steal any panties. At that moment, my father-in-law hastily covered his mouth. I had only mentioned underwear, not specifically panties. He had dug his own grave. Hannah turned beet red. Unbelievable. Aren't you ashamed of doing such a thing? I'm telling you I didn't steal them. It must be some mistake. No, it's no mistake. Sir, you are indeed an underwear thief. Look, here's the proof. I said as I showed them the screen of my smartphone. My father-in-law entered the changing room, glancing at the bathroom door and picking up my underwear. The whole sequence was captured on video. I had recorded it with a hidden camera. Since the theft continued, I had to put a hidden camera in the changing room. And then I caught this. By the way, it wasn't just this one time that things were stolen. This foolish old man. That's why I told you to stop. Oh. I'm sorry, Elizabeth. I really am sorry. It was just a moment of folly. Whether it was a moment of folly or not, an underwear thief is an underwear thief. If I report this to the police and go through the proper channels in court, you will likely be convicted. A man who was caught by the police for stealing his daughter-in-law's underwear. My father-in-law would have to live being pointed at for such a thing. He seemed very averse to this idea, bowing to me repeatedly. Finally, I glared at my uneasy-looking husband. Albert flinched. He was nervous, wondering what would be said next. I glanced at my in-laws and then asked Albert. You heard everything. You understand how miserable your parents made me, right? There's no way I could live with such a family. You wouldn't blame me for wanting a divorce, would you? My parents are sorry. But I am your husband, and spouses are supposed to help each other. Help each other? Is that what you're saying, Albert? You never helped me once while your parents were making my life miserable. You have some nerve saying that. I'm sorry. Albert looked down, remorseful. But no matter how much he apologized now, it was too late. I didn't ease up on him. It's not just that you didn't help me. You also had an affair, didn't you? What? That is... an affair. Albert, did you really cheat? Come on. Apologizing won't fix this. You can't even speak up against your own parents, Albert. And you were thinking about other women while you were married to Elizabeth? His parents criticized him, despite their own faults. But Albert couldn't respond. The affair was a fact. I explained that I had hired a detective agency to investigate his affair. The investigators are professionals. They've got solid evidence of the affair. I'm so sorry. Elizabeth, I truly am sorry. It's too late for apologies now. I'll be asking for alimony for the affair. Should I add the detective agency's fee on top of that? After all, it's as if we have a $4 million debt already, a little more won't matter, right? It can't be okay. Please, have mercy. At that point, I took out what I had prepared. A divorce form. Just in case, I had obtained it from the city hall. I had kept it in my room for a while, but now its time had come. I had already filled out my section. Here. Receive this divorce form now. No, I don't want to. I don't want to divorce you, Elizabeth. Please, let's stay together. If you agree to the divorce, I'll reduce the amount of alimony. How about that? Really? He seemed to start thinking about how he could come out of this with the least loss. However, he seemed unable to come to a decision. He sighed and shook his head. No matter how much he disliked it, I was determined to go through with the divorce. I was considering filing for divorce mediation at the family court, if necessary. But it seemed that wouldn't be needed. As he gave up on thinking, he received the document at my urging. His mother tried to stop him, saying, "This idiot," but when I glared at her, she quieted down. Thank you. I'm glad. Now I can be free. I was happy when we first got married, but I regretted it soon after. Because all three of you were really the worst. Elizabeth, I'm really sorry. At first, all I cared about was you. That's enough. I don't want to hear anything. It all sounds like excuses now. Could your parents please leave? Honestly, I don't want to see your faces anymore. Don't you think that's a bit harsh? The father-in-law stopped his wife from saying anything further. They quietly left, looking dejected. What followed happened very quickly. I submitted the divorce papers to the city hall. By the afternoon, I had found a new place, signed the lease, and arranged the move. Though dealing with all the changes related to the divorce was a hassle, it was also liberating. Once this is over, I can be free. That thought was somewhere in my mind. As I was leaving the condo we had lived in together, my ex-husband tried to stop me.
Elizabeth, do you really have to go? Can't we really start over?
How many times do I have to tell you? It's impossible. Live happily in a $4 million house with your family of 3.
That's impossible. I can't do it without you.
Don't count on my income anymore. Things will never go your way again. My ex-husband broke down crying after my cold response. It was as if he had been dealt a final blow. He had brought this upon himself after everything he had done. It was only the natural outcome. I left the condo with just my last few belongings, feeling deeply relieved. Later, my ex-husband began living in the $4 million house with his parents. Though they planned to sell it eventually, they wanted to live in it for the time being. My former mother-in-law, despite her aching back, started working part-time at a fresh food store. Perhaps she wanted to help her son even just a little. Unfortunately, her love for gambling was a serious flaw. Any money she made was mostly spent on casinos and slot machines. Saving money for living expenses was nearly impossible. She seemed to be completely addicted. Eventually, she even started borrowing money for her gambling habits. Instead of helping, she ended up causing more distress to her son. Since she barely did any housework, the new home quickly became filthy. By a few months in, the house was cluttered with garbage from convenience meals. No one in the family made an effort to clean or maintain the house anymore. This neglect drastically reduced the value of the $4 million property. The former father-in-law was just as bad. His excessive drinking eventually ruined his health. He became an alcoholic and was unable to manage daily life properly. Leaving the father unchecked was not an option. The freelance ex-husband tried to balance working and keeping an eye on his father. However, the father would sneak out of the house whenever he could to get his hands on alcohol. Since he had no money, he often shoplifted at convenience stores. Each time, my ex-husband Albert would have to go pick him up, apologize to the store managers and police, and take his father into custody. He probably grew tired of this daily routine. Eventually, my former father-in-law was placed in a facility. It seems he accepted this willingly, perhaps thinking it was better than continuing to burden his family. Now, my former father-in-law lives in a group home referred by medical professionals, a facility dedicated to those hoping to recover from alcohol addiction. Sadly, neither my former mother-in-law Hannah nor Albert has ever visited him. I can't even imagine how lonely he must feel. It was Albert who told me all about these family matters. He regularly calls me, asking if we can start over, which is a pointless question. I really am reflecting deeply. Please, Elizabeth. Can we start over? No means no. How many times do I need to say it? I'm relieved to be divorced. If you have time to call me, you should work more. Don't you still have a massive loan to pay off? Yes. Did I tell you? We sold that $4 million house. Now Mom and I live in an apartment. We wanted to sell it for as much as possible, but it didn't even reach $1 million. The house was in terrible condition. He speaks as if it's someone else's problem, but he's also to blame for not cleaning. The new house got dirtier as no one did any housework. Leftover food and cleaning trash attracted a lot of pests and rodents. Because of this, the inside of the house became even dirtier, and eventually, neighbors called the police because of the foul smell. When the police arrived, a faint smell of decay wafted from the house. Thinking such a house would sell for a high price was a big mistake. The neglect by my former in-laws and Albert was clearly to blame. The remaining loan amount is several $1,000,000. Even I, who consider myself a high earner, am shocked by the amount. I'm busy, so I need to hang up. I have to prepare for an overseas business trip. Oh, sorry. Well, see you later. Don't call me again. Just hearing your voice is exhausting. Plus, I'm seeing someone new. I don't want to cause him unnecessary worry, you understand? Understood. Sorry. My ex-husband apologized in a lonely voice. And I was the one who hung up first. It feels like everything is finally over. I'm looking forward to my business trip abroad. My new boyfriend, like me, travels both domestically and internationally. We respect each other's values and admire each other, which is wonderful. If it weren't for my marriage to my ex-husband, I might not have met my current boyfriend. In that sense, maybe I should be a little thankful to my ex-husband. After all the hardships I've faced, I want to be twice, even 3 times as happy. Right now, I'm living each day with a positive outlook, eager for happiness ahead.
You are the ideal woman for sure. If I didn't have a wife, I'd want to marry you, Betty.
It looked as though my husband, John, was proposing to our eldest son's wife, Betty, right there on the bed.
You can't do that.
Though Betty appeared to be resisting, she was also getting closer to John on her own accord. I was shocked to see this unfold on my live security camera. I couldn't believe John and Betty were embracing each other in our bedroom. I had always suspected something was going on between them because they seemed too close, but I never imagined I'd witness such a scene live. But then I thought to myself, I have clear evidence of their affair right here. So, why not expose this video in a big way? My name's Patricia Johnson, a 55-year-old housewife. Currently, I work part-time a few times a week. My husband, John, is the same age as me and an office worker. We are high school sweethearts. It's been 30 years since we got married. We barely talk anymore. Whenever I try to start a conversation, John just grunts a short reply. It feels like he doesn't even look at my face anymore. He watches TV and eats in silence during dinner. My only companion at home is our pet Shiba Inu, Carl. Carl is my cherished buddy. We have a son. Our eldest, Terry, is currently 28. Last year, he married a woman named Betty, who's a year younger than him, and they now live with us. Initially, I didn't expect to live with my son and his wife, but Terry said he wanted to stay at our home, so I agreed. It was mostly for financial reasons. While my son, Terry, has a steady job, it seems that lately, with overtime being restricted, his earnings aren't all that great. Considering the monthly rent, he mentioned wanting to save money by living at home for the time being. I was uncertain about living with my son's wife. However, even though it's just been the two of us, my relationship with John has been cold for a while. Maybe having others in the house might liven things up. Hoping for a better environment, I decided to move in with Terry and his wife. At first, after we all started living together, things were surprisingly smooth. Betty seemed to have a reserved personality, much like Terry. She was considerate, helping around the house, and was always pleasant to me. Things were going so well that I thought, living together might not be so bad after all. But after a while, things began to change. John and Betty seemed to be getting unusually close. While Betty isn't particularly skilled in household chores or cooking and often says she lacks confidence, John always encourages her warmly. I've always lived with my parents, so I'm not used to making even simple dishes like beef stew. Do you think my seasoning is okay?
For a beginner, it's pretty good. It's tasty, Betty.
John, who barely speaks to me, would talk to Betty in such a sweet tone.
I used to live off campus during my college days, so I'm actually good at cooking. I'll show you how next time we have a day off. Really? I can't wait for your cooking lesson, John.
With a big smile, Betty replied, and John seemed absolutely thrilled. He never cooked a day in his life since we got married. Ever since Betty moved in, John has been coming home from work much earlier. He often brings home desserts and gifts she'd like. Seeing them like this, I couldn't help but feel uneasy. On the other hand, Terry didn't seem to notice anything and acted quite indifferent even in front of Betty and John. As time went on, not only John but also Betty's behavior started to change. While she acted all sweet and helpless in front of John, she started to show a colder attitude towards me when we were alone. One evening, when it was just the two of us, I went to take a shower before Betty.
Betty, I'm done with the shower. It's all yours.
I forgot I'd already told her once, so I accidentally repeated myself after a while. I get it, you don't have to tell me twice. Betty snapped at me. I was taken aback. Sure, it was my mistake for saying it twice. But she didn't have to be that harsh. She was never like this when she first got married. From that point on, I became a bit wary of Betty. Maybe she sensed how I felt about her. She started acting more and more condescending towards me day by day. I've ended up taking on more of the household chores than before. Meanwhile, Betty just sits on the couch, constantly on her phone. I felt frustrated, but had no one to confide in. John really likes Betty, and Terry would definitely see me as an enemy if I spoke ill of his wife Betty. Then, on a certain day off, John was eager to teach Betty how to make dumplings. Seeing John in such a good mood, I wanted to complain a bit.
You've never made dumplings before, have you?
Even when I said that, John just replied, "Quit nagging," and brushed me off.
Well, let's start with getting the ingredients. Betty, ready to go? Yes. Thank you.
Betty answered with a big smile. John and Betty, chatting and laughing, happily got in the car and drove off.
John and Betty, they've been getting along really well lately, haven't they?
I tried striking up a conversation with Terry.
Yeah. I mean, I'd rather they get along than not. It's better for me.
Terry replied, while glancing at his phone. He didn't seem to feel any particular way about it. About 2 hours passed. The two of them returned from shopping. It sure took them a long time considering they just went to the local supermarket. I thought to myself. According to Betty, they took a break at a cafe during their shopping trip. Looking at John, he awkwardly avoided my gaze. The two of them seemed to enjoy making dumplings afterward. Betty was so close to John that she almost leaned on his shoulder. Every so often, Betty would touch John. John seemed completely smitten with Betty. Eventually, the dumplings were ready, and we all sat down to eat. Sorry, I don't feel so good. I'll pass. You guys enjoy. Saying this, I went to my bedroom and collapsed on the bed. I just couldn't muster an appetite. I hate to admit it, but I feel like I'm losing it out of jealousy. John and Betty are acting all lovey-dovey like newlyweds. I don't even feel like eating the food they made. I can tell that Betty is getting all cuddly with John just to spite me. Call it a woman's intuition, I guess. She understands that if she has both John and Terry on her side, she can have a higher position in this household than me. Like this, I slowly started losing my place at home. Living with my eldest son and his wife began as a way to save on rent. I suddenly thought. Even though Betty is married, she doesn't have any kids yet. She's still young. If she wants to save money, why doesn't she go out and work? If Terry can't get overtime and earns less, why doesn't Betty work too? Even in my 50s, I'm working part-time, but Betty stays home all day. Seems like she just lounges around, watching TV shows she's recorded or on her smartphone. One day, I asked Betty in the flow of a conversation.
Don't you want to work or something? Huh?
Betty went silent, seeming taken aback. Immediately, John jumped to her defense.
Hey, you don't need to say unnecessary things. It's enough for Betty just to be at home.
John scolded me.
Well, if Betty wants to work, she can, but if she wants to stay home, she doesn't have to push herself.
Terry just gave his usual non-committal opinion. With both of them supporting her, Betty had a smug look on her face. I couldn't say anything more. Then after some time, I got a call from Betty at my part-time job.
Patricia, something terrible has happened. Terry had an accident at work and was taken to the hospital in an ambulance. What?
I informed my workplace of the situation and rushed to the hospital. Terry was in the intensive care unit, looking nothing like himself. He was delivering products to a client in a company car. While on his way, a truck driver from the opposite side got distracted, crossed the median divider, and collided head-on with Terry's car. The other driver got away with minor injuries, but Terry was in a critical condition, unconscious. Despite the doctor's best efforts, Terry never made it back. I couldn't believe that Terry passed away before me. The sudden turn of events was too much to believe. I spent the night crying by his side. Betty looked deeply shocked as well. John stayed by Betty's side, comforting her more than me. With no time to mourn properly, we had to start preparations for Terry's funeral. Usually, the main mourner should have been Betty, but she said, "I have no idea how to handle a funeral," and didn't make any effort.
"You've got experience. Help her out,"
John instructed me. So, I ended up handling all the arrangements and expenses for the funeral. On the day of the funeral, suddenly, Betty got up from her seat and left. Maybe she rushed to the restroom, overwhelmed by tears. Then, perhaps concerned about Betty, John also left as if following her. Time passed and there was no sign of their return. I thought about going out to check on them. However, with obligations to greet other attendees, I couldn't just leave my seat. But they sure are taking their time. I pulled out my smartphone, thinking about calling John. Checking the screen, I noticed a notification from my pet camera app. I was gonna be out all day, so I turned on my pet camera. When my dog, Carl, stays home alone, I keep him in the bedroom. The camera captures the entire room and I can see everything through the app on my phone. I wonder if Carl is okay. Since the morning chaos, I hadn't fed him. I didn't even take him for his morning walk. I opened the app to check on Carl in the bedroom. Despite being in the middle of a funeral, I almost screamed. Lucy was caged, barking as if he wanted out. Beside the cage, a man and woman were lying on the bed. I immediately stood up and rushed to the restroom with my phone. Taking a deep breath, I looked at the screen again. It was John and Betty on the bed. They were embracing each other, still in their funeral attire. My mind was spinning. Betty, who had left her seat crying, and John, who seemingly followed her. Why are they in our bedroom? But then again, the funeral venue is just a 5-minute drive from my house. It's not entirely impossible. I stepped outside to check the parking lot. John's car was nowhere to be seen. It seemed they had indeed driven to the house. I locked myself in the restroom again and checked the camera. Carl had stopped barking and I could hear the two talking. John tenderly wiped away Betty's tears, touching her face. Surprisingly, Betty was smiling in response. "You really are lovely, Betty. Truly beautiful." John showered her with compliments. "Really? That's so sweet of you." Betty seemed genuinely pleased. She had been crying at Terry's funeral just moments ago. "You're the ideal woman for me. If I didn't have a wife, I'd want you as mine." John seemed like he was proposing to Betty. "No. You can't." Betty showed a bit of resistance, but was also clearly drawn to John. "You do remind me of someone, Betty. So much resemblance." Hearing this, I was in shock. John and Betty continued their intimacy on the bed. I couldn't watch any longer. I closed the app. I'm feeling disgusted and not wanting to see any more. When I finally left the restroom in a daze, I managed to get back to my seat. After a while, John and Betty returned to the funeral venue together. Both looked somewhat downcast. Betty's hair was a bit disheveled. To those around, it might have just seemed like a devastated wife, Patricia, breaking down in tears, and a kind father-in-law, comforting her. However, knowing the truth, I was boiling inside. But all I want right now is to get through Terry's funeral. Trying to suppress my anger, I held it together. After the funeral, we finally headed home. John and Betty were seated on the living room couch. I immediately went to the bedroom to get our dog, Carl. "Carl, sorry for keeping you locked in the bedroom all day." As soon as I did, Carl bolted out of his cage. He wagged his tail happily at me and then darted into the living room. "Hey, what's gotten into you?" Ignoring John's attempts to calm him, Carl made a beeline for Betty's feet.
"Ah! What the heck?"
Even as Betty shrank back, Carl jumped up at her, barking. The force knocked Betty to the floor. I was stunned by Carl's behavior. He seemed furious with the two of them. Thinking back, I remembered seeing on our pet camera that Carl had been locked inside a cage in the bedroom. That cage was from when Carl was a puppy, and we hardly use it anymore. Because he hates it. John and Betty probably caged him because he'd be in the way when they got intimate. I'm sure they ignored Carl's barking. They might have let him out when they left the room, but Carl must have been upset with them for confining him in that tight space. Hey, Carl, calm down, I'm gonna feed you now, John tried to pacify him. But Carl, showing no interest, bit at John's foot. Carl doesn't particularly like John or Betty, who never take care of him. He probably can't forgive them for locking him in the cage he detests.
Ouch! Hey, stop that! Don't come near me! What's with this dog? Is he out of his mind?
Betty exclaimed, frightened, as Carl growled and lunged at her feet. I'm the only one who takes care of Carl. Feeding, walking, everything. So, he loves me the most. It seemed like he understood how John and Betty were hurting me and was attacking them on my behalf. Carl was standing up for me. This gave me the push I needed. I had saved all the footage from today's pet camera. Perfect evidence of their affair. I wondered if I could use this somehow. I thought about it for a while. After some time passed, we decided to hold Terry's memorial service at our house. For the service, not only our family and relatives, but also Betty's parents are planning to come. For me, this is a golden opportunity. Everyone gathered in our living room, where the memorial service took place. Afterwards, everyone started chatting loudly around the catered food. When everyone had finished eating, I stood up and began to speak.
Thank you all for coming today for Terry's memorial service. I have something I'd like all of you to see today.
Everyone became silent and focused on me. John and Betty looked stunned as I was bringing up something unexpected. I closed the shutters of the living room and turned off the lights. Even though it was daytime, the room went pitch dark. I pressed the remote for the projector I had prepared in advance. This projector was something John had bought a while ago, saying, "It's like watching movies at home." Although, he hadn't used it much recently. On the wall of the dim room, a large video started playing. It showed John and Betty on a bed, flirting in funeral attire. Thanks to the projector, they were almost life-sized. Their intimate interaction was broadcasted loudly. Hey, what the hell is this?
Wait, what's going on? Why?
John and Betty were completely shocked. They were panicking. The audience started murmuring things like, "Oh my God. What's this?" and "Seriously." John and Betty, in their distress, stood up trying to block the screen from view.
Both of you, sit down. You're in the way.
I shouted at them loudly. The video continued to show their passionate embrace.
Betty, this can't be real. What is this about?
Betty's parents stared at her with a twisted expression.
Ladies and gentlemen, this footage was captured by a pet camera I had set up in our bedroom.
Hearing this, John muttered, "Damn it." He probably had forgotten about the camera there.
If you look at the date and time at the bottom of the screen, these two snuck out of Terry's funeral service, drove back, and did this in our bedroom.
Hearing this, everyone gasped and exclaimed, "No way," and "I can't believe it."
Hold on, there's a reason for this. I was really sad about Terry's death and was crying. John came to comfort me, and it kinda just happened.
At that moment, the video reached a scene where she said, "I've actually liked you for a while," to John. I paused the video at that point.
Did you hear that, everyone? Not only my husband, but it seems Betty was pretty into it too.
Betty's face turned bright red from embarrassment. I pressed the play button again.
While Terry's death was shocking, I always felt something was missing. I actually prefer men who shower me with compliments. So maybe I prefer you over Terry.
Betty's voice played loudly, and everyone glared at her.
There are such terrible women in this world. Ugh, it's sickening.
I said, shuddering.
Betty, I never knew you could stoop so low. It's truly pitiful. That's right. I can't believe she's our daughter. What an embarrassment.
Betty was scolded by her parents and broke down in tears. Then, John's voice could be heard from the video.
You are truly the ideal woman. If I didn't have a wife, I'd want you as mine.
Seems I'm just in the way for my husband.
There's nothing sadder than that.
Everyone gave John disapproving looks, and he cast his gaze downward in shame.
I feel so bad for Patricia. Who knew John was such a terrible person?
John received cold stares from all the women present and was sweating profusely. Then John's voice was heard again from the video.
You really does resemble my first love.
I pressed the pause button again.
Everyone, Betty looks just like my husband's first love. But that's no excuse for him to make a move on his son's wife.
John's face turned pale.
I know about my husband's first love. We were high school classmates. I had a friend who had an older sister named Sophia. That Sophia was my husband's first crush. Well, it was just a one-sided love though.
John looked embarrassed as I revealed his past. I paused the video and displayed a photo on the screen.
This is my husband's first love.
The screen displayed a graduation photo of a young girl. A girl with neat braids. It was Sophia from her high school days. Upon close examination, there was a certain resemblance to Betty.
And guess what? We have Sophia here with us today. Please welcome Sophia. What?
John was so shocked that he couldn't close his open mouth. I turned on the lights, and the room brightened instantly. Suddenly, a middle-aged woman energetically entered the room. This was Sophia, John's first love. I knew Sophia's younger sister and had her contact, so after explaining the situation, Sophia said she'd love to meet John.
Hey, long time no see. John, how've you been?
As she said this in a loud voice, the large woman stood before John. The current Sophia was quite plump, reminiscent of a female wrestler. She looked nothing like she did in high school. Her voice was hoarse, probably from drinking. John was frozen in shock.
Sophia. You mean you liked me that much, John? I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me?
Sophia, now a bold character, made a grand entrance and left John dumbfounded.
You made a move on your son's wife just because she looks like me. John, that's just not right.
Sophia said this and playfully slapped John's shirt. He staggered from the impact.
Hey, I'm divorced and single. I run a bar now. Why not join me?
John was forcibly hugged and swayed by Sophia.
No, I'm married, you know. But Patricia already gave me the green light. She said she'd hand you over any time.
Hearing this, John looked at me. While looking at Sophia, I nodded in agreement and said, exactly. I feel like throwing out this husband of mine right now. If anyone wants him, feel free to pick him up. Just then, Betty, who had been silently watching, suddenly spoke up.
Wait a minute. John, aren't you being a bit harsh? How do you think I resemble this hefty woman? What? No, she used to be really cute back in the day. Never thought she'd change so much.
When John said this, Sophia hugged him tightly again and said, Excuse me? It's rude to talk about someone like they're some kind of monster. We're both divorcees, right? Let's try to get along. By the way, I've been looking for a new man. You'll do, John, won't you? John could only shake his head in refusal.
I don't look anything like her.
Betty was fuming.
Shut it. You're making a scene.
Betty was scolded by her parents. The reunion became total chaos. John and Betty were shunned by the family and promised not to have any more dealings with them in the future. After that, I kicked both John and Betty out of the house. I divorced John and sued both of them for the mental suffering they caused me. Betty's feelings for John cooled down, and she started to resent him. Their relationship deteriorated quickly. Having been abandoned by her family, Betty wandered aimlessly. Being unemployed, Betty found herself suddenly living alone and applied for various jobs. But she couldn't get a good job as her interviews didn't go well. Now, she's working multiple part-time jobs day and night, living alone in a rundown apartment. As for John, his affair with his son's wife became public at his company. Due to the damage to his reputation and the loss of trust, he got fired. Now, he's just scraping by, doing manual labor part-time jobs. Moreover, John has been getting constant invitations from Sophia. The constant pestering is mentally wearing him out. Even though John was married to me, he always had a soft spot for Sophia since high school. But this unexpected reunion turned those sweet memories into a nightmare. As for me, without the stress of having John and Betty around, I'm living peacefully by myself. I can't help but feel sorry when I think about Terry. But if I keep being down about it, Terry won't be happy either. I've continued my part-time job and started a home garden, making sure to stay active. And, most importantly, I have my buddy, Carl. Going for walks with Carl is the happiest time of my day. I hope to continue living fulfilling days in this house. Huh? Charles is on a business trip too. I've heard Charles is out of town for work. I haven't heard anything about his trip getting shorter. The lights have been on every night, though. Neighbor gave a puzzled look. Things got a bit awkward between the two of us, but the neighbor just went back to their house. I wonder what's going on. Charles was supposed to be on a business trip for a week, and it doesn't make sense for him to be home without letting me know. As I thought about it, I came up with a possible explanation. So, I called Linda, my mother-in-law, and made a suggestion. Can you and your husband come over to our house secretly? Charles's birthday is coming up soon, and I want to surprise him. Linda replied. Of course, honey. A surprise sounds so thrilling. We'll head over shortly, just hang tight for us. With that, she hung up. All right. Things are about to get interesting. I grinned. My name's Jennifer, and I'm turning 33 this year. Charles and I have been married for 3 years. We met at the company we used to work at. We don't have kids yet. I only switched jobs a year ago. I'm still getting the hang of my job, and I'm worried about inconveniencing the company if I were to take maternity leave right away. So, I want to get more comfortable with my work first before thinking about having kids. I changed jobs to further develop my skills. Charles and I were in the same sales department, him being my senior. I often sought advice from Charles whenever I couldn't meet my sales targets. He even accompanied me on major client appointments. We grew closer as I consulted with him regularly. And soon we were dining out and hanging out together, building a close relationship. Then one day, during one of our usual dinner outings, Charles suddenly proposed. I'm in love with you, Jennifer. I want you to marry me. Having trusted him through our work together, I replied. I'd be happy to. The joy on Charles's face when I accepted was unforgettable. He thanked me repeatedly, saying, Thank you. I'm gonna make you the happiest woman alive. Seeing Charles so elated, I felt sure of the happiness that lay ahead. We live not too far from Charles's parents, who reside in the next town over. It's a comfortable distance for me, better than living with them, at least. At the beginning of our marriage, they weren't too thrilled about my job. Because they believed that my dedication to work might delay us starting a family. Jennifer, don't you want kids soon? Maybe you don't have to work that hard, you know. Every time I met her, my mother-in-law would repeat this like it was her catchphrase. My father-in-law, perhaps eager for a grandchild, would always tell me, I want to hold my grandchild. Charles is my only child, so you're our only hope, Jennifer. My father-in-law had just retired from a regular office job, and my mother-in-law was a stay-at-home mom. Charles was an only child, making them a family of 3. Perhaps because Charles is their only child, it seems they expect me to have several children. I think they might also want an heir. Charles wants a lot of kids, right? I've overheard my father-in-law asking Charles this question numerous times, and my mother-in-law would say things like, I'll be there to help raise the kids with Jennifer. You can rely on us anytime. Charles probably got used to his parents' comments. He would only respond with, Thanks. Well, kids are a blessing, and we can't tell when they'll come to us. He never really defended me, so there were times I honestly didn't want to visit my in-laws. But they aren't bad people. I made some homemade roast beef for you. I remember you said you liked it. I hope you like it. My mother-in-law would often say, bringing me some of her dishes. I admire my mother-in-law for being able to make homemade roast beef, and I genuinely appreciate the delicious food. My father-in-law has his good sides too. Sometimes he would quietly hand me some pocket money, saying, "It's not much." I'm not sure if he does the same for Charles. It's nice that he'd give it to me, his daughter-in-law. With such in-laws, I've managed to maintain a relationship of neither being too close nor too distant. However, the pressure for a grandchild from them isn't my only concern. My work has its own set of challenges. Especially with business trip. The company I switched to requires a lot of business trips. At my previous job, female employees had some considerations, so long trips were limited. But it's different now. Perhaps because it's a sales job for construction materials. There are frequent trips. With all products developed in-house, clients are spread across the country, from New York to California. Regularly hopping from one place to another is the norm for proposal sales. Initially, I knew nothing about construction materials, so it was tough. Moreover, most of the business clients are men. At times, some would be dismissive, almost implying, "I can't discuss this with a woman." Being brushed off or not taken seriously was a regular occurrence. However, when a company accepts my proposal, the satisfaction is immense. And when I visit a completed building using our products, it's an inspiring experience that boosts my motivation. But, as I felt more accomplished in my job, the number of trips increased proportionally. Lately, I've been traveling once or twice a month. Ranging from short 2-day trips to ones lasting over a week. Some months, I'm barely home due to business trips. It seems my in-laws are not happy with this. One day, when visiting my in-laws with Charles, my mother-in-law sternly questioned, "Jennifer, what do you think of Charles? Don't you want to stay home and cook for him?" She must have been worried about her son. Especially since she's been a stay-at-home mom her entire life, she probably assumed that it's only natural for a woman to prioritize the household. After that, I got an hour-long lecture from her. During this, my father-in-law just sat there, looking extremely awkward, like he'd become part of the furniture. Maybe Charles felt sorry for me getting grilled by his mom, because he jumped in to defend me. "Jennifer's been working hard, you know. I'm often away on business trips, so please, don't be so hard on her." And Charles gave me a reassuring pat on my shoulder. My mother-in-law seemed surprised, probably not expecting Charles to stick up for me. Maybe she thought she was conveying her son's feelings to me. "Well, if Charles says so," she remarked, sounding resigned. Seeing her act like this made me think that she really must love and worry about her son deeply. That was an eventful day. I had spent most of that week on a business trip in Chicago. Initially, I had planned for a week, but my proposal to the client went smoother than anticipated, so I was able to come home 2 days earlier. I was thrilled about this unexpected change, but when I had informed Charles about my business trip schedule, he said, "My trip's gonna be the exact same time as yours. So don't worry, just do your best, Jennifer." So, Charles shouldn't be home yet. Although I was glad to be back early, I felt a tad lonely thinking I'd be alone at home. However, as I approached the house, something felt off. To my surprise, I noticed the lights were on. Particularly in our bedroom on the second floor. As I stood there, dumbfounded, neighbor called out to me, "Jennifer! I'm so sorry about yesterday." Neighbor is a young woman in her early 20s. She is living with her husband and baby. "Yesterday? What happened?" I was caught off guard and must have looked puzzled. Neither Charles nor I were home yesterday. So there's no reason for her to apologize. Then the neighbor started explaining. "For the past few days, my baby has been crying a lot during the night. You must have heard it, right? I was worried that we might have disturbed your sleep." She looked genuinely apologetic and concerned. However, I thought there must be some misunderstanding. Huh? Charles is on a trip. I had heard from Charles that he was away. And he hadn't mentioned anything about returning early. Really? The lights were on every night. I think they've been on every night for the past week. Sometimes, when my baby is crying at night, I carry him out to the balcony to soothe him. Our balcony faces your house directly, so I thought maybe you haven't been on business trips lately. Neighbor looked surprised. It created an awkward atmosphere between us, but then neighbor was called by her child from inside her house and went straight back home. What's going on? I was increasingly puzzled. Charles was supposed to be on a business trip this week. It's impossible for him to be home without notifying me. The reason I think so is that Charles can't cook at all. In the past, I would prepare a lot of meals in advance and freeze them. If I didn't get the food ready to just microwave, Charles wouldn't be able to eat. Suddenly, I wondered if he might have gone back to his parents' place. I decided to call Linda, my mother-in-law, to check. Hey Linda, has Charles been coming over for dinner all this week? I asked as soon as she picked up the phone. No, he hasn't been here. Linda replied with a surprised tone. That's strange. If he didn't go back home, what was he doing for dinner? As I thought about it, one reason came to mind. Then, I made a suggestion to Linda on the phone. Can you and your husband secretly come over? Charles's birthday is coming up soon, and I want to surprise him. Linda replied.
Of course, honey. A surprise sounds so thrilling. We'll head over shortly, just hang tight for us.
I knew she wouldn't hesitate to come. She's the kind of person who doesn't think too deeply about things. All right, this is gonna be exciting. I grinned slightly.
Jennifer, we are here.
About 15 minutes later, my mother-in-law came, bringing along my father-in-law. They both must really love their adorable son, Charles. Perhaps it's because I mentioned a surprise for Charles beforehand, but they had such excited expressions on their faces.
What's the surprise gonna be?
My father-in-law asked me with a slightly playful tone. Charles thinks I'm still on a business trip and haven't come home yet. He must be feeling lonely by himself right now. So, I thought we could all sneak into the house and give Charles a little surprise. I was thinking of ordering everyone's favorite Chinese dim sum for dinner later. How does that sound? I shared the plan I had thought of before my in-laws arrived. Of course, I have a different motive, and there's a hidden agenda to the plan I shared with them. However, it doesn't seem like my in-laws suspect my surprise plan at all.
Sounds fun! Everyone loves Chinese, so let's order the premium stuff. It'll be on me.
My father-in-law said with a sudden smile.
Should we also get some wine later? Charles will surely be surprised.
My mother-in-law seemed genuinely pleased. Seeing my in-laws so genuinely joyful made me feel a bit guilty. Thinking about what might happen next, which could steal away their smiles, made me feel a bit uneasy. However, I managed to suppress those feelings and, without showing any emotion on my face, said, Shall we go then? From here on, it's a surprise, so please be quiet, both of you. I then quietly unlocked the door and we all entered. There was no light in the entrance, but the outside brightness made things somewhat visible. That's when I noticed. As I had suspected, a pair of red high heels that weren't mine, neatly placed side by side. At that moment, my face went blank, but my in-laws didn't notice. When I glanced at their faces, they still seemed thrilled. They were probably imagining Charles's surprised face, unable to hide their smiles. We then quietly made our way up the stairs towards the bedroom on the second floor. Light was seeping from the bedroom, and there was a faint presence of someone inside. As we got closer, we could hear voices. I pretty much guessed what was happening, so I wasn't shocked. However, my in-laws were probably puzzled to hear voices coming from a room where Charles was supposed to be alone. They both looked a bit bewildered. Without a word, I went up the rest of the stairs and opened the bedroom door. As expected, Charles was in the bedroom.
Jennifer! Why are you here?
Charles said, looking surprised. I finished my business trip early and came home. What's going on here? I spoke to Charles. Next to Charles was a familiar-looking woman. Well, Charles seemed at a loss for words. That figures. The woman with Charles was Linda, who worked at the same company as Charles as a receptionist. I used to work at the same company as Charles before I switched jobs, so I recognized Linda's face. She's younger than me and had just started right out of college. Her hair was brown and beautifully curled. Her nails and clothes were on point, showing she put effort into her appearance. However, even when I was at our old company, Linda had a reputation. And not in a good way. With her looks, it's no surprise Linda is a receptionist. She's very cute. She probably doesn't struggle to find boyfriends. But Linda has a bit of a manipulative side. Rumors had it that she'd frequently switch between men she was dating. A good friend of mine, who secretly dated someone from our company, lamented how Linda managed to snatch him away at some point. That time, I had to listen to my colleague vent till the last train, and all I could do was console her. After hearing such things multiple times, I couldn't help but see Linda as an enemy among women. As I was lost in those thoughts, Linda spoke.
"Isn't that Jennifer? What a coincidence," she said cheerily.
She seemed utterly unaware of doing anything wrong.
"Linda, do you realize what you're doing? Charles is my husband, you know."
I asked Linda, trying to keep my cool. Though I was a tad irritated, I did my best to hide it. Linda chuckled and said,
"Of course I knew. I originally worked at the same company with you, and I tend to want things even more when they belong to someone else."
Saying this, she teased me. Twirling her hair with her fingers, she looked at me with a mischievous grin. Indeed, Linda was just as wild as the rumors suggested. She didn't seem fazed by the situation at all. In fact, she seemed to be enjoying the drama. I wonder if Charles couldn't stand this atmosphere. Charles hesitated and began to speak to me. "Sorry, Jennifer, you've been traveling a lot lately. I've been kinda lonely, and you know, eating microwaved meals alone just isn't the same. Then Linda said she'd cook for me and take care of me, so I just..." When I glanced at Charles, his cheeks were slightly flushed. He must be gradually falling for Linda. I let out a heavy sigh and said, "So, that's the situation. What should we do, mother-in-law, father-in-law?" Addressing my in-laws, who were visibly shocked by the unexpected turn of events. My in-laws were standing near the stairs, out of Charles and Linda's view. My father-in-law stood with his mouth wide open in shock. "Why are Mom and Dad here?" Charles hurriedly approached and was bewildered when he saw his parents near the stairs.
"You mean these are Charles's parents? Why are they suddenly here?"
Even Linda seemed taken aback. She probably hadn't expected not only me but also his parents to be present.
"Jennifer planned a surprise for Charles, right? So why are you doing this?"
My mother-in-law was in tears over Charles's indiscretion. This was just too much for her.
"What the hell? You don't care about Jennifer and you're cheating on her."
My father-in-law shouted at Charles, trembling with rage. My in-laws have always been close, and I've never seen them fight. This situation was probably unimaginable for them. While I was thinking about this, Charles started complaining to me.
"Jennifer, why'd you call Mom and Dad? It's totally uncool to drag my parents into this."
Charles glared at me. "It seems that I'm to blame for everything because I called his parents." Linda sided with Charles and said,
"That's so low of you, Jennifer."
My in-laws seemed quite irritated by Charles and Linda's remarks. After all, it's clear to anyone that the one cheating is in the wrong. My father-in-law was so angry, his face was so red.
"Aren't the worst ones Charles and Linda?" "Not just Charles, but it's totally unreasonable for him to cheat in the house I live in too," I said, looking straight into their eyes.
I countered firmly.
"Just because you were on a business trip, huh? It's my house too, you know. I did nothing wrong."
Charles replied defiantly. Linda nodded in agreement.
"My house, you say? Do you even know who owns this house?"
I asked Charles. In a smug manner, Charles responded,
"Isn't it ours? It's clearly property shared between the two of us."
I sighed deeply. "No, it's in my name.
Remember when you couldn't get approved for the mortgage because you had too many credit card debts? That's why it had to be in my name. Plus, you haven't paid your share of the mortgage. Ever since we moved in, I've been the one paying for everything."
Neither of Charles's parents knew about this. They both looked quite shocked. They probably assumed Charles was taking care of the payments. Quick to defend himself, Charles said.
All right, maybe you're right about the house. But I've been covering car maintenance and groceries, haven't I? You've had it easier financially because of that.
I was taken aback by Charles's argument. Charles mentioned about car maintenance, but he is the only person uses car. Today he used his car for commuting, but I usually take the train. Most of the time, I travel for work, using planes and trains, so I don't really feel the need for a car. The train station is within walking distance, so I have no issues getting around.
So, you are the only one using the car, right? And about the groceries, I usually do the shopping at the grocery store. Are you saying the groceries are for Linda? That has nothing to do with me, does it?
Charles's face turned a shade redder, seemingly having hit a nerve. I was utterly disappointed, and it seemed his parents felt the same. They were both at a loss for words.
Anyway, a divorce between you and I is what's best, right? I'll be seeking monetary compensation for my mental suffering from both you and Linda. Also, since this house is mine, could you both leave right now?
The mention of divorce changed the color of Charles's face. Hearing about my mental suffering, Linda went pale.
Jen, you're joking about the divorce and suing us, right? I wouldn't be able to make it on my own,
Charles said, going pale. Considering how Charles has been spending his money, his reaction was not surprising.
You've hardly contributed to our household finances since we got married. I bet you spent it on having fun with Linda or on whatever you felt like,
I pointed out. Charles fell silent. Linda seemed taken aback by Charles's behavior. Then my father-in-law, who had been silent until now, spoke up.
Jennifer, we're truly sorry. We had no idea Charles had been causing you so much trouble.
My father-in-law seemed genuinely remorseful. And then my mother-in-law addressed me.
The reason Jennifer has been working so hard is because Charles wasn't contributing to the household. We truly don't know what to say. We're so sorry.
My mother-in-law was on the verge of tears. Charles's negligence must have been a shock to them. Speaking to Charles's parents, I said, I've tried to make it work because I used to love Charles. But after such a betrayal, I've come to dislike him. I'm sorry to both of you, but I'll be seeking a divorce. I conveyed this to my in-laws, who had taken care of me in so many ways. My father-in-law responded, Of course. We'll make sure Charles takes responsibility for this. We truly apologize for everything. He sincerely apologized to me and was getting teary eyes. Although I told him he doesn't need to apologize to me, he kept his silence and looked apologetic for a while. Then, my in-laws took Charles and Linda and left. I remained in the house, feeling a mix of sadness and regret, and cried. Later on, the divorce went through smoothly. Through the lawyer my father-in-law introduced me to, I demanded settlement from Charles and Linda. I was able to collect $10,000 from each of them. Being able to collect this amount was also thanks to my father-in-law. He apparently gave them both a long lecture when he took them home that day.
You betrayed Jennifer with what you all did. You all better show some real sincerity,
he said. But neither Charles nor Linda had the money. Both of them liked to splurge on themselves. So, for the time being, my father-in-law fronted the $10,000 for each of them, and it seems Charles and Linda will repay him later. I'm nothing but grateful to my father-in-law. As for what happened to Charles and Linda afterward, turns out both of them left their jobs. Rumors about Charles and Linda had been circulating in the company for a while. And when my divorce with Charles was finalized, their relationship came to light. Given the circumstances, the company felt the need to take some action. Their solution? Transfer him to a remote branch. Charles was moved to a tiny branch office in a rural area with just a handful of employees. There was absolutely nothing fun around that branch. Apparently, he couldn't handle it, so he resisted and decided he was gonna quit. Of course, his resignation was accepted right away. Linda, being a contract employee, wasn't offered a contract renewal. There had always been negative talk about her in the company, and this incident seemed to be the last straw. An old colleague, who I was close with at my previous company, filled me in on all this. I thought to myself, they got what they deserved. It is what it is. Around the time Charles left his job, he called my cell phone multiple times. At first, I ignored him, but he was so persistent that I finally picked up. "What do you want now?" When I answered, Charles said in a desperate voice,
"Finally! Please, you gotta help me out."
From what Charles shared, he'd been job hunting since he left his previous job but hadn't been able to secure a new position. He'd been living with his parents, so he was getting by. However, one day, his father-in-law told him to sell his car to repay a debt of $10,000. After selling the car and giving the $10,000 to his father-in-law, he was told, "You're no longer needed here. Go wherever you want and live your life." It seemed Charles had been essentially disowned.
"I tried asking Linda, but she's in a similar situation with no money. The only person I can rely on is you. Can you please help me out?"
he pleaded. "Why would I help someone who did what you did? We're strangers now." I firmly told Charles off. Yet, Charles wouldn't give up.
"Actually, I'm right outside your house now. Can you let me in?"
Perhaps because he was desperate, Charles wouldn't back down. So, I calmly told him, "Someone else is living in that house now, you know? I've moved away and live somewhere completely different. In fact, I'd rented that house to someone else. The rent was covering the mortgage, so it's breaking even for now."
Well,
Charles must have been really shocked, as his voice trailed off towards the end. "I don't think we'll ever see each other again, so, goodbye." I told Charles that and hung up the phone without waiting for a response. Then, I immediately blocked Charles's number. 3 years have passed since then. I'm as busy as ever. However, one major thing has changed. That's having a child. Turns out, I met someone new after that and got remarried, giving birth to a healthy baby boy. I love my husband, he's really sweet, but oh boy, my child is just adorable. Right now, I'm on parental leave, taking care of my child every day. Of course, I absolutely love the hustle and bustle of work. That's never gonna change. But the cuteness of my own child? That's unbeatable. Even though every day is super hectic, I'm looking forward to spending fun times with my family of 3.